Just to say a few words, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the Citizen Army was born out of the lockout of 1913, which was a fight for workers' rights, for the right to be in a union, for the right to negotiate, for the right to try and improve your pay and conditions. And unfortunately, they were up against an employer, William Martin Murphy, who didn't recognise any of those rights. The only right he recognised or believed in was the right to make money for himself. And if he can use other people to make money for himself, he was happy to do that. And so when the workers presented a demand for better pay and conditions, and they're being paid about 20% less than tram workers in any other city on these islands, he sacked them. He sacked all of them. And that happened on the 26th of August, and immediately rioting broke out in the city, and the workers involved began trying to stop the trams, and the police immediately started making arrests. And some of the most violent incidents actually happened outside that gate there, on High Street and on Thomas Street. So we're very much at a place where you could say the Citizen Army and indeed the Transport Union were formed, and where the modern trade union movement was formed here. I don't think they're going to start using water cannon on us just yet, not a big enough crowd, and you're all behaving much too well. But just to explain the significance of the Citizen Army very briefly, it was formed as a defence force for the workers. And that was quite common. It happened not just in Ireland, it happened in Britain, in North America, in Europe when there was a strike and it was attacked by the police or by scabs working for the employer. And many of the scabs in Dublin were issued with firearms by the employers in 1913. The Citizen Army was there to defend them. But unlike other defence forces, it didn't disband when the lockout was over, when the dispute was over. It formed itself into a proper army, if you like, and it adopted a constitution. And some of the key elements of that constitution are in the 1916 proclamation. It was written, their constitution was written by Sean O'Casey, who later left the Citizen Army, but he fell out with practically everybody he ever worked with in his life, so it's not unusual. But he wrote the original constitution of the Citizen Army, and you could say he's the unacknowledged author of a 1916 proclamation, because two of the key elements in the Citizen Army constitution were the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and the right to equal opportunity and equal rights. And they're, I think we'd all accept, the most fundamental aspects of the proclamation. So there's a very rich heritage there of which we are all heirs. So finally, I'd just like to say a few words about William Partridge, and Bernard and Hanratty has already referred to him. He lived in the area, he lived in Patriotic Terrace, down towards the other end of James's Street. He was on the Citizen Army Council. He was a district delegate of his own union, the Amalgamated Society of Engineers, and he played an absolutely critical role because he was a man who went to Manchester to the TUC conference, which was held on the day after Bloody Sunday here in Dublin, where between 400 and 600 people were seriously injured in baton charges from the police, from the Dublin Metropolitan Police and the Royal Irish Constabulary, and he convinced the delegates there to back the Dublin strike. If it hadn't been for that, it would have been a local tram strike that would probably have ended within a couple of weeks. But because of that support, the workers were able to hold out for 5 months and to save the union. So he played a very, very critical role. In 1916, he was a captain in the Citizen Army. He saved the life of Margaret Skinner, one of the women members. Unlike the Irish Volunteers, the Citizen Army allowed women to be full members. She was shot twice in Harcourt Street during the fighting, and he carried her back into the building, the Royal College of Surgeons. Otherwise, she would have died. So he was a remarkable individual. He was a Labour councillor. He was one of the great orators of his day. Unfortunately, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison afterwards, and he contracted nephritis. And he came back to Ireland to die. In his own words, he said, "They released me from prison to save Her Majesty's government the cost of an inquest." And he went home to Ballahadreen, and he died there in July 1917. And we hope to commemorate him with a summer school next summer, and to set up a dedicated trade union summer school that will focus on workers' rights and workers' issues in the workplace. So that's just a very brief summary of the Citizen Army and its significance and why it's still relevant today. And thank you very much for coming along, and thank you for giving me a hearing. Thank you.
Thanks indeed, Padraig, for, as always, a very informative talk. Thanks indeed. I'd next like to call on an activist of the Dublin District Council, Alison Regan to talk about the connections and the significance of Transport, General Workers Union, James College, the ICA and modern day SIPTU.